The bones of 40 humans vanished without a trace in December 1941. Not 40 modern humans, 40 ancient humans. Fossils representing 40 individuals from a species that walked the Earth nearly 750,000 years ago. They were the most valuable collection of early human remains ever discovered. They were packed into 2 wooden footlockers and were supposed to be loaded onto a ship bound for America, and they disappeared into history at the exact moment the world was burning. This is the story of Peking Man, the story of scientific discovery, international intrigue, and one of the greatest mysteries in paleontology. The tale begins at a cave system called Zhaokudian. The name translates to Dragon Bone Hill, located about 30 miles southwest of Beijing. For centuries, Chinese medicine men had extracted fossilized remains from the limestone deposits there, selling them as dragon bones to be ground into medicinal powder. No one understood what they actually were. In 1918, a Swedish geologist named Johan Gunnar Andersson was exploring the region. He found a massive deposit of Pleistocene fossils and recognized its significance. His team excavated the site systematically. In 1921, they uncovered 2 human-like teeth. The discovery was promising but incomplete. The teeth alone could not prove anything conclusive about ancient human habitation in Asia. That proof arrived in earnest when a Canadian anatomist named Davidson Black arrived at Zhaokudian in 1927. Black was searching for evidence of early humans in China. Based on a single molar tooth, he identified a new hominin species and gave it the Latin name Sinanthropus pekinensis, Peking Man from China. The scientific community was skeptical. A single tooth was not enough evidence, but Black had staked his reputation on the discovery. He established the Cenozoic Research Laboratory with funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, and he committed to the excavation. The breakthrough came in 1929. A Chinese paleontologist named Pei Wenjiang was working at the site when he unearthed the first nearly complete skull cap. The skull was unmistakably human in origin, yet distinctly primitive. It had a massive ridge of bone above the eyes, almost no forehead, and a long, low cranium. The brain was larger than a chimpanzee's, but smaller than a modern human's. The skepticism evaporated. Peking Man was real. Over the next decade, excavations at Zhaokudian would yield the remains of more than 40 individuals. Men, women, and children. Infants and elderly adults, all preserved in layers of sediment spanning tens of thousands of years. What these ancient humans left behind told a story of survival and adaptation. Archaeologists uncovered over 100,000 stone tools, choppers, scrapers, and blades made from local stone. Thousands of animal bones bore cut marks indicating butchery and processing for food. Thick deposits of ash layered throughout the cave showed evidence of fire use. Not accidental fires, controlled fires, sustained and managed. The remains of charred bone and burned stone indicated that these humans had mastered the use of fire, a technological leap that allowed them to survive in colder climates, cook their food, and protect themselves from predators in ways their ancestors never could. These fossils were offering humanity a window into its own deep past. They were evidence that humans had reached China 500,000 years ago. The implications were enormous. This was the largest collection of early human remains ever found at a single site. This was early human society laid bare. Then World War II arrived. Davidson Black had died in 1934, before the war's shadow reached China. German anthropologist Franz Weidenreich took over the research. Weidenreich was meticulous. He made plaster casts of every specimen. He commissioned detailed illustrations. He documented measurements, analyzed bone structure, and reconstructed the face of Peking Man based on the fragmentary skull remains. His reconstructions showed a heavy face with wide-set eyes and a broad, low nose. Features that linked these ancient beings to modern humans, yet distinguished them unmistakably as different. Weidenreich was racing against time. Japan had invaded China in 1937, initiating the Second Sino-Japanese War. The excavation at Zhaokutian ground to a halt. The Japanese military was consuming the landscape. Beijing was no longer a place of scientific inquiry. It was a place of conquest and control. The fossilized remains of Peking Man, sitting in the Peking Union Medical College, an American Baptist teaching hospital, were now sitting in occupied territory. Chinese archaeologists and their American colleagues understood what that meant. Imperial powers throughout history had stolen cultural and scientific treasures from conquered lands. There was no reason to believe Japan would behave differently. Initially, the fossils were transferred from the college to a safe in an American bank vault for protection. That seemed secure, but as the war deepened, even the bank vault did not feel safe enough. The college's president, Henry S. Houghton, was resistant to moving the collection. Weidenreich pushed for a transfer to the United States. Weidenreich argued that the fossils should be evacuated to America, where they could be preserved at the American Museum of Natural History. Houghton disagreed. Weidenreich eventually escalated the request through diplomatic channels. He contacted a senior administrator named Weng who approached the U.S. Embassy. Weng convinced the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, Raymond B. Fosdick, to support the evacuation. By September 1941, authorization was finally granted. The American embassy would coordinate the transfer. The 2 footlockers containing the Peking Man fossils were packed at the Peking Union Medical College. Each footlocker held skeletal remains representing dozens of individuals across all age groups, collected over more than a decade of excavation. Weidenreich had made casts of everything. He had recorded everything. He had created a scientific archive that would survive even if the original specimens did not. But no one was planning for that possibility. The plan was straightforward. U.S. Marine Corps personnel stationed in China would transport the footlockers from Beijing to the coastal port city of Changhuandao. From there, the specimens would be loaded onto the steamship SS President Harrison. The ship would sail to America. The fossils would arrive at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. The collection would be safely housed in the world's premier scientific institution. The Harrison left Manila and headed for China on December 4, 1941. Once there, the ship was scheduled to have the fossils loaded, and then they were to depart on December 8th. On December 7th, Japanese forces attacked Pearl Harbor and the world changed overnight. America was at war. In Beijing, chaos erupted. The Japanese military moved swiftly through the city. American personnel faced immediate danger. The 2 footlockers containing Peking Man were still waiting to be transported to the coast. The marine detail was suddenly consumed with the immediate crisis. Evacuation protocols replaced scientific logistics. In the confusion, the footlockers were eventually placed with a group of Marines for transport to the coast. Different accounts describe the journey. Some sources indicate the materials left Beijing on schedule. Others suggest the journey was incomplete. What is certain is that the footlockers never reached America. They were never delivered to the SS President Harrison. Some reports indicate the ship itself was attacked by Japanese warships and ran aground. Others indicate the Marines carrying the boxes were intercepted or captured. The exact sequence of events remains unclear because Beijing became a communications blackout during the Japanese occupation. Messages could not flow freely in or out of the city. The Marines stationed at Camp Holcomb near Changhuandao Port, if they ever took possession of the specimens, were themselves taken prisoner by Japanese forces. The chaos of wartime turned into the chaos of occupation, and somewhere in that chaos, the 2 wooden footlockers containing the Peking Man fossils disappeared. No credible sighting of them has ever been confirmed. After the war, extensive searches were launched. Scientists spent years looking for the specimens. Rewards were offered. Private investigators were hired. No results. The search extended across decades. Some thought the fossils might have been aboard the Maru, a Japanese ship known to have sunk during the war with valuable cargo. The coordinates where it went down were searched. Nothing was found. Some theorized the specimens were captured by Japanese military and transported to Japan as war booty. They would have been valued by Japanese scientists as colonial trophies. Japanese searches produced nothing. Some suggested the bones had been discovered by occupying forces, misidentified as worthless rubble, and discarded into a landfill or destroyed. Another theory emerged decades later. In 2010, an email arrived at the inbox of a paleontologist researching the mystery. The message came from the descendants of Richard Bowen, a Marine Corps corporal who had been stationed at Camp Holcomb. According to the family account, Bowen had discovered the 2 footlockers in the base's storage area in 1947, well after the war had ended. The camps were still occupied with American forces remaining in China during the Chinese Civil War. Bowen knew what he had found. He recognized the significance, but by that time, China was in the midst of a brutal conflict between communist forces and the nationalist government. The geopolitical situation made it impossible to do anything with the specimens. Bowen eventually left China as American forces withdrew. The fossils, if Bowen's account is accurate, remain behind, buried somewhere near the coast, possibly beneath roads, parking lots, or warehouse foundations. Excavations in the coordinates Bowen provided have yielded no results. There is also the possibility that the marine detail successfully retrieved the fossils, and the United States government has simply never disclosed it. This theory persists among some researchers, particularly in China. The American Museum of Natural History has never admitted to possessing the original specimens, but the theory suggests that they were quietly received and stored, with the information classified or deliberately concealed for diplomatic reasons. It is speculation without evidence. The most pragmatic explanation may be the simplest. In wartime chaos, with communications severed, military priorities overwhelming scientific ones, and the added complexity of Japanese military aggression, the footlockers were lost, not stolen, not intentionally destroyed, simply lost to the confusion of history. Remarkably, the loss did not destroy science. Before the specimens disappeared, Franz Weidenreich had created something that would prove invaluable. He had made plaster casts of every fossil. He had created detailed drawings and photographs. He had compiled extensive research notes and measurements. He had preserved the information even if he could not preserve the objects themselves. He had created a scientific record that would outlast any individual artifact. In 1949, after the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War and the cessation of hostilities, excavations at Zhaokutian resumed. New fossils were discovered. Stone tools were cataloged. The understanding of Peking Man deepened. Since 1949, Chinese and international teams have recovered additional specimens and refined the dating of the site. Modern methods using radioactive decay of aluminum and beryllium in quartz grains have provided precise age estimates. The fossils from Zhaokutian are now dated to between 750,000 and 400,000 years ago. Only 4 original teeth from the pre-war excavation survive in the Paleontological Museum of Uppsala University in Sweden. Everything else from that first collection, the 40 individuals, the complete and partial skulls, the skeletal elements, exists now only in the casts, photographs, and detailed research that Weidenreich preserved before the war. When asked about the loss after World War II, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit and paleontologist who had worked at the site, reflected on it philosophically. He noted that Peking Man had been thoroughly documented, measured, X-rayed, drawn, photographed, and cast in plaster down to the finest anatomical detail. He concluded that the loss was more a matter of sentiment than scientific tragedy. The information had been preserved. Science could continue, yet the loss remains significant in ways that transcend academic study. The original fossils represented a direct physical link to humanity's ancient past. They were windows into 750,000 years of history. They contained microscopic details that modern analytical techniques might eventually reveal. They held biological information that was lost forever when they vanished in 1941. The casts and records are invaluable, but they are copies. The originals were unique, and they are gone. The question of what happened to them has preoccupied researchers for over 80 years. The leading theories remain speculation. The Japanese captured them. The Americans captured them and concealed their possession. They were destroyed. They were buried in China. They sank into the ocean. They were ground into powder. Each theory is plausible. None has ever been proven. The mystery deepens when one considers that if any government entity had actually recovered the specimens, the political value of revealing that recovery, whether it was Japan, America, or China, would eventually outweigh the value of concealment. Yet no credible evidence of recovery has ever emerged. What makes the mystery especially compelling is the exact timing. The Peking Man fossils disappeared on the exact date that the world was fundamentally transformed. The attack on Pearl Harbor occurred one day before the ship was scheduled to depart. The Marines were taken prisoner one day before they were supposed to hand over their precious cargo. The entire sequence collapsed in a moment that changed everything, a moment that prevented history from being preserved. Peking Man was an ancestor of modern humans in Asia, representing a crucial stage in the human journey. These individuals hunted and scavenged across the landscape around Beijing. They made tools. They used fire. They survived in communities. They died and were buried in caves where they would remain for over 500,000 years until they were discovered. Then, just as humanity was finally ready to understand its own history, ready to preserve and study these irreplaceable specimens, the world went to war, and the connection was severed. The link between modern humans and our ancient past was nearly lost. The casts and records saved science. The research continued. Our understanding of human evolution advanced. But somewhere in a filing cabinet, in a cave, in a warehouse, in an ocean trench, or in some unrevealed archive, the original Peking Man fossils remain, silent, waiting, bearing witness to a mystery that has consumed paleontologists for more than 8 decades, a mystery that may never be solved, a reminder that even in the age of documentation and preservation, some discoveries can still vanish, some truths can still be lost, some links to our past can still disappear between the moments when we find them and the moment when we finally understand what they mean. Subscribe to World War II, Steel and Power for more great stories from this monumental era.